Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, have you ever said something that you wish you didn't say? I can hear thousands of amens out there in your cars and on your lawnmowers and in your weight rooms right now, because brother, Lawson and I have been there. But conversely, have you ever spoken just the right word at just the right time? Today, we're going to talk about what Proverbs 12 has to say about our mouth and our words that we use. And we are in the tail end of a series on Proverbs 12. You can go back a few episodes if you want to catch all of it and join us on this adventure through Proverbs 12, where we're pulling out lessons for dads from chapter 12 of the book of Proverbs. My man, Lawson, how are you, buddy?
What's going on, man? I was listening to your little intro there, and dude, isn't it
little,
great?
Little intro. Why do you have to say the word little?
Right. Yeah. Sorry about that. That was
Move on. Whatever.
That was a slip up. When you say, have you ever spoken just the right word at just the right time? Man, isn't that the best feeling?
I wouldn't know.
Would you
describe it for me? What's it like?
Right. That's funny. No, this is gonna be good.
No, I do think I have gotten better at encouraging in my lifetime. And and so slightly, it's kind of like I went from maybe a 0 to now I'm like a 4, that's infinitely better for those of you mathematicians at home. Before we dive in, I would love to say, I heard this week from a brand new Manhood Journey donor who helps support our ministry, which produces the Father on Purpose podcast. His name is Tim. He lives near Washington, D.C. And he said, "It is my pleasure to help support what you all are doing to grow godly and intentional fathers. Thanks for what you're doing. Been listening for about a year from the Virginia area." Man, Tim, thank you so much for jumping in. Thanks a lot, Tim. And for putting your money where your mouth is and caring enough to donate to the ministry, because we're a nonprofit and these episodes come out for free because of donors and sponsors. And that's the only way we can produce this content. So Tim, thank you. So Dad, you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, my name's not Tim. Well, but you could be like Lee in Dallas, or you could be like Alex in Grand Rapids, or you could be like Jay in Maryland, or you could be like another Tim in California. We'll take donations from any name under the sun. So whether your name is Bart, Behemoth, or Jehoshaphat, you can donate.
What in the world?
Dude, I have no idea where these names are coming from. We do, but those other names I listed are legit, real supporters of the Father on Purpose podcast. Dallas, Michigan, California, Maryland, Virginia. We need your support to produce this podcast each and every week. And we are delighted to do it. Lawson and I love doing it. And Hunter, back in the throes of the machine of producing the podcast, the three of us are delighted to do it. We do need funds to keep it going. So feel free to jump in. You can do that today at manhoodjourney.org/donate. That's manhoodjourney.org/donate if you'd like to help support the podcast. So Lawson, we have several verses from chapter 12 of the book of Proverbs that deal with the use of our mouth or our words. Get us started with one or all of those. And where would you like to begin today?
Yeah, I think this is a good way to set this up. And that is, that words matter. You mentioned something before we got started about words carrying weight. And I think it's really important for us to understand that as dads, how we say things, when we say them, what exactly we deliver, that really does matter. And Proverbs 12, particularly these, 6 or 7 verses that we've got picked out, kind of go together to help us understand what God's direction is for us in considering how good words can do certain things, and how sinful talk, not sinful talk, or necessarily, use of bad words. I'm saying the way that we speak and the way that we use our mouths as a dad, as a husband. It like verse 6 says, the words of the wicked. This really struck me. The words of the wicked lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright delivers them. In verse 6, and that's, it made me wonder. Like, so lying in wait for blood. And I did a little work on Open Bible to understand that part better. Some of it said, that it waits in the dark. Words that are wicked. And so I wondered, how does this apply to our kids? And it made me think about, the kids that they see in the hallway at school, or as they, wait around at the bus stop, or as they go out to a party. Maybe there are kids out there that are going to try and pull them into saying or doing something. Now, those kids may not be, like rubbing their hands together as an evil person. Like, I can't wait, I'm lying in wait for blood. They may not even really truly realize that they're, going down a bad path and trying to pull your kid into that with them, trying to ensnare them in that. And so as the dad, that second part of the verse says, but the mouth of the upright delivers them. And that's a relief. That can be, that's our role as a dad, is to help our kids understand, like, what to watch for. What might they be encountering in the future? And so our mouths of the upright could deliver them from being pulled into something that would be, kind of the equivalent of something or someone lying in wait.
Yeah, right on. In fact, what we've done with Proverbs chapter 12 throughout this whole series is look at verses that kind of go together, even though sometimes in the book of Proverbs, you can look across a chapter, but we see verses like 6, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19. These verses all have something to do with our mouth or our words. And to your point, verse 6 that you just described paints our words in pretty stark and frankly dramatic kind of context. It's not like, well, the words that you say that are bad, they have a slightly adverse effect. It's like they lie in wait for blood. Like, it's pretty rough language. And it reminds me that it's really hard to say something with your mouth that is neutral. That's 100% has no good or no bad. It's just simply neutral. Almost everything we say is going to be one or the other. It's actually going to be something that builds up or something that tears down. I mean, even if you are, I used to work a lot with electrical engineers who worked at a company, and they were talking about systems design, and they were talking about energy, they were talking about manufacturing. And if they were up giving a presentation on some new tool or some whiz bang idea, everything they said was either helpful or incorrect, right? Usually it was very helpful. It was spot on. And in order to do this, you connect these wires together like this, or people die, right? Like, it mattered that you got some of this stuff right. And so even in a work context, often we might say, well, I'm just sharing the budget. I'm just giving the sales presentation. I'm just doing an HR review. Well, yeah, but the way that those words come out of our mouth can either be sneaky and with hidden agenda and with hidden meaning that's negative, or they can be positive and they could build someone up, right?
Yeah. And 14 says, from the fruit of his mouth, a man is satisfied with good, and the work of a man's hands comes back to him. The fruit of your mouth can satisfy. I love that. I love that thought, like, as a guy that you're just kind of coming and going and having conversations, how aware are we that our mouth can produce fruit, or it can tear down? And that verse to me says your mouth can do similar things as your hands. Like, if a man's hands are productive and doing good, you reap the benefit from that. Likewise with our mouths, the same can happen. And so, I wonder, how many times have my daughters noticed me saying something productive and fruitful
Yeah.
to Audrey, and they witness that. Or, maybe one daughter sees me saying something and handling a situation, and the other one has nothing to do with them,
Yeah.
but they see and hear it. And so I don't even know it, but fruit has been planted, in her brain as well.
I am both not both. I'm almost always just intimidated by the stretch of Matthew where Jesus is talking about our words. It's in Matthew 12. And in verse 36, he says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. And verse 37 says, for by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. And we all can think of the verse in Romans 10, I think 9 and 10, going from memory. It says, if you confess with your mouth that Christ is Lord, you will be saved. Like there's a power in our words. There's a power in our words.
Mm-hmm.
A business friend of mine told me 10 years ago, he goes, Kent, you're going to be a much more effective leader when you learned how to respond instead of react. And man,
that's cool. That's
like,
good.
Even those words, think about just for a moment. Most guys are hearing that, and they're hearing that the same way I heard it, right? They're hearing that, well, wow, that's really good input. Well, think about time out. A guy spoke those to me. Those are words. Yeah. Those are words still living in my mind and in my heart because of the power of the truth of what he was saying. And the fact that I had track record with this guy, I trusted him. Like he's a spiritual mentor. Like there were 8 or 10 things about him that made it so that his words carried a lot more weight. And so rather than say to me, I mean, think about what he was actually saying. Okay. Hey, Kent, you're a hothead. You run your mouth too much was kind of what he was saying. Right. but he found a way to say it. Like you're going to be a much more effective leader when you learn how to respond instead of react. Think about how delicate and how approachable and how kind. It's like we've used this metaphor before, Lawson, you and I can shove something of valuable at you in like a closed fist, and you're going to recoil and not want it, even though it might be a diamond ring or $100 bill. But if I present it to you with an open hand on a platter in a gentle way, oh, you'll take it. Well, think of just how, even his name's Greg. Think of how Greg's words were delivered to me in a way that it's like, a seed, and they still are bearing fruit, right? Years later. Now I just shared them with thousands of dads. Like, so the words that he shared with me continue to live on. So consider for a moment, Dad, you're in both of these chairs every single day. The chair of receiving words from other people. How do you receive them? How do you react to that statement I just made that says you're going to do better if you learn how to respond instead of react? And secondly, you're also in the chair of giving these words to your wife, your children, your colleagues. How are you doing? Are you delivering them on a platter in a gentle way? Or are you shoving them at people? And it's still like that phrase, and Greg said 10 other things I can still recoil. Freudian slip there. Yeah. I probably do recoil that I can still recall. Even 8 or 10 years later, it's amazing how long words can bear fruit.
Let's hone in on that piece about, I mean, you kind of, beat yourself up.
Let's just hone in on my problems. Let's hone in on my
that's what I was going to
life issues, so we can just avoid whatever Lawson doesn't want to talk about.
Plenty to talk about.
Guys, buckle up. Today's podcast will be 9 hours and 42 minutes.
Yeah, listen in as Kent receives instruction. No, none of us have this figured out, and it's like, if you're tired, if you've had a long day, if you've had something bad happen to you, it's not always easy. It's not, I would say it's hard. It's really hard to then turn around and, be a great dad that just has all the right words and comes across soft and, with wisdom. But let's hone in on verse 16 says, the vexation of a fool is known at once, but the prudent ignores an insult. So, something bad can happen to us. The vexation of a fool is known at once. What that's saying is, another translation says, fools show their annoyance at once. And it made me think of like, people with a short fuse or a temper that's just like, whoa, man, like that's way overreacting. Come on. Um, and if we bring that into our home, what gets in the way of when you do want to give good advice or words that heal? It's like, if someone's just and here's the other one. The verse 18 says, there's one whose rash words are like sword thrusts. And so, like you said, delivering something good, but you're balling it up in a clenched tight fist and trying to push it at somebody.
Yeah.
It makes me think of, like, if we are the guy that is running off, like half cocked and short temper and says biting things at our kids or our wife, and then when you try to come with something that's not that, what they're gonna, kind of recoil. Like you said, they're gonna, expect something coming at them, or they're not gonna know what to expect. And so that just makes it that much harder. And so, like, when we're instructing our children about, I think especially early on, a temper tantrum, we can see that. Like, I had two daughters, two very different personalities. Olivia was always like very emotional. You knew what was going on with that kid at all times.
Yeah.
And we had to temper her temper early on and let her know that
Right.
this is not acceptable, because later in years, you got to reinforce how little fruit can come from a quick and vicious reaction, which is what I think that first verse is talking about, where it says, about coming across as quick tempered, I guess.
Yeah.
I would call it.
Yeah. Well, and for me, verse 16, this vexation of a fool is known at once. Man, I can play back in like the recorded tapes in my head of like hundreds of times. Like if I had to save my life, I'll bet you I could write down 100 instances where my frustration was known at once.
Yeah, right.
Like, there are certain, we all have different struggles in life, I guess, or maybe temptations or leanings. One of mine is, the good news is you're going to know exactly what I'm thinking. Bad news is you're going to know exactly what I'm thinking. And I used to wear that kind of like a badge of honor, like, hey, I just tell it like it is, no, I tell it like I am. And that's not wise. That's not usually very healthy. And that's rarely very productive. So if you're the dad listening and you have lived by that, well, I just tell it like it is. There's two assumptions you're making in that regard. Number one, you're making the assumption that you have perfect vision of how it is. In other words, your version of the truth is the version of the truth. That's the number one first false assumption that you're making, is that you have cornered the market on absolute truth and you know exactly what this means. That's part one. Part two is you think everybody else needs to know what you think. Like they're somehow going to be deficient or not be able to live their life or not be able to live a whole life or live it the right way unless you share exactly what you think about every single topic. And so if you're the tell it like it is guy, let's join me on the lifelong journey of not being that guy. Let's get off that bus and let's get on the bus of sharing things that are gentle and approachable, where you're striving for peace and you're striving for understanding. Another verse in Proverbs says that the mouth of the wise is like a fountain of life, and so the idea is, are the words coming out of our mouths giving life, or are they spewing destruction? Is it like water, or is it like lava? Is it going to burn everything in its path, or is it going to give life as it goes? And I'm still a work in progress on a lot of this, man.
Let me pivot just a little bit. I think you said all that very well. Verse 25 says, anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. We hear a lot nowadays of, like, kind of not looking down, but kind of, I don't know, maybe beating up a little bit the younger generation. Like, all these kids, or that they're always on their phones or, excuse me, social media, this or that. And yeah, some of that can be true, but part of what that's producing in kids, let's call it, I don't know, younger than 20, is anxiety. They have got so much coming at them that can weigh them down. And verse 25 says anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. I think about anxiety, like you said earlier, the weight of our words can matter. Anxiety can feel like a heavy weight. Carrying it is exhausting.
Yeah. Well, if you go look right now, if you're a dad and you want to know whether or not you're filling your mind with anxious thoughts, just go look at whatever news source you chose to partake of this morning or today to stay current on today's world events, and just look at two things in that news source. Number one, look at the ratio of positive stories to negative stories. And I'll go ahead and spoiler alert, it's 2 to 98. So for every 100 stories you're going to find in your major news outlet, 98 of them are negative. And secondly, look at how many of those 100 stories are something you can do anything about, or something that actually will directly affect you. And frankly, that's going to be like 10-90. There's going to be maybe 10% of those stories you might affect you indirectly. But the other 90, so what we're doing is we're feeding on this glut of negative, and frankly, if I may be so bold,
true.
We're feeding on this glut of negative and frankly irrelevant information. Not because like I don't care that people in other countries are being harmed, for example, using some news headlines from today, but that is not Philippians 4:8. That's not whatever is good and right and pure and true. Think on these things. Romans 12:1 and 2. The transforming of our mind is what causes us to be able to discern God's will. Colossians 3:2. Set our minds on things above, not on things on the earth down below. And so as I look at these verses, I think, man, I run a ministry. I lead a family. I got to have, I got to manage my money. I got to love my wife. I got to lead my kids. I got to run manhood journey. Do I really need to know the details of all the stuff in the major media in order to do what God's asked me to do? Ephesians 2:10, he prepared good works in advance for me to do. What are the inputs I need? Well, if you're a stockbroker, you kind of do need to pay attention to financial things in our country. Got it. But for most of us, we're glutting. We are over consuming negative and irrelevant information, and then wondering, why do I feel so anxious? Why do I feel so heavy?
Yeah.
And to your point, our kids are probably dealing with it even more than we are, given the digital connectiveness.
Yeah. And they may not even realize that what they're bringing in is both irrelevant and inaccurate. It's just totally false and has no bearing on their lives, but it feels like it does. It comes to us like, what the news sources are doing, they're really good at it. They really know what drives attention. And so, you've got to, where can good word come from? It says, but a good word makes him glad. So it's like a healing. It can be a counterweight to anxiety. I thought about, have you ever seen athletes, like professional athletes out training? I think of seeing like some of these behind the scenes NFL shows where they're out on the field in summer camp and they're dragging a weight. They're literally hooked up with a harness to pull a weight behind themselves, sometimes more than their body weight. So like on a weighted sled. And the reason they're doing that is for strength, for cardio, endurance, and all that. But it's also so that when they are disconnected from that weight, they feel like they weigh nothing, like they're light on their feet and they can run so much faster, Wow. And I think good word doesn't always have to be a direct, necessarily encouragement or praise about something. It can be, it doesn't have to be like you don't have to, we don't have to walk around like a cheerleader. That's not what this is saying. It can be, a good word can involve pointing out things to be thankful for. It can be, talking about things that are going right, maybe helping them understand like, no, that story that you just read on your feed, that's not real. That's not accurate. It's not the truth. Here's the truth, and helping to be that counterweight.
Well, you forgot, Lawson. The other reason they're dragging that thing behind them is because they look really cool on YouTube. I mean, like, just dragging stuff. That's awesome. I think of the verse, Luke 6:45. It says, the good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure of his produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. And what I would love to do with dads is help all of us realize that when we say words that are cutting or biting or like sword thrusts, as Proverbs 12 would say, the issue is often not with the words that we said. The issue is usually deeper because, as it says in Luke 6, we're speaking out of the abundance of our heart. So the question I like to ask myself when I say words that hurt people, what was it in my heart that caused me to say that? And that's a much shorter route to the solution than, well, I said X because she said Y, or my kid said was disrespectful, so I said, what I said. No.
That's surface. That's not the root.
Right. There's a way. Like, so even in my own context, right? I got a 9-year-old at home and he will say things that are disrespectful. Granted, he's 9. Like, my job is to train him to not do that. And so, but sometimes when he says those, I come at him like, a tiger. And I'm like, and I all up in his grill, right? Other times when I'm more well-rested, I'm, in my right mind, I will say, hey, do you think the way you just spoke to your mom is okay? Mm-hmm. Oh man, I'm going to get much better outcomes with that kind of question. And in the process of delivering that question, I didn't sin against him, right? I didn't wasn't grabbing his shirt collar and yelling at him as I have done in the past. And so for me, there's a way to deal with even pretty big, egregious, and then again, a 9-year-old speaking sharply to his mom is not the hardest thing we all ever have to deal with. But what I'm saying is, even when I'm dealing with those things, if my heart is right, I can ask a thoughtful, probing, intentional question and make the same point or better than if I just rail at him for being a disrespectful 9-year-old.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And, likewise, I think a similar thought is it doesn't have, not everything has to be addressed right in that moment. Like you just, just described. Well, go ahead.
Yeah. No, you just reminded me of the first 5 years of my marriage where I took that verse, don't let the sun go down in your anger. So literally, where I would force April to stay up till like midnight talking through something. Yeah. And every word after about 9:30 was not helpful, and I'm like, and I just kept leaning on it and pressing on it. And she and I laugh about that these days, but man, you just caused me to flash back 25 years to just feeling like every single thing needed to always be aired out, always in the moment, always 100%. That is not a wise way to walk through life.
Yeah. It's okay sometimes to just think about it and maybe consult and think like, all right, so how will I do this? How am I going to address this? What words am I going to use? I think that's many times that's a whole lot better way of dealing with something, maybe picking the right time. And you know what, maybe it's not you, maybe you and your wife talk about it. And I've had times before where Audrey's like, no, let me handle this one. I think this is something that would come better from me. And then on the converse of that, we've talked and the opposite has been true as much or more, but then she'll say, but be careful, be careful how you say that, because coming from you, Dad, it can sometimes come across, or just because you're the dad, it carries more weight.
Yeah. I am convinced that if more dads knew how heavy their words landed in their kids' minds and hearts, number one, we'd probably say less just in general. We'd probably just talk less a little bit because some of our words are too sharp and too critical. But we would say a lot more positive things. Like if someone, I remember one time a guy who was really close to me said, I'm a fan of Kent Evans. And I just remember that landing with me in a way that was really needed. I was a little down at the moment, and I was feeling, like I wasn't getting things done. And this guy really encouraged me. You talk about that verse that we shared a minute ago, verse 18. Those people whose words are rash, like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And I feel like that guy, when he shared that with me, it was very healing, and it was very wise, and it was very encouraging. We alone, like Dad, you're listening to this podcast. You've already demonstrated that you want to be a more godly father because you're out looking for podcast content. Way to go, man. Way to go. Like,
Yeah,
you're
right
way
on.
ahead. You're in the snow-capped mountain of fatherhood, right? Because you're at least giving it the, college try. But if you could go that one step further and think like this week or this day or in the next hour, you're gonna hang up this podcast. Hang up. Is that like a telephone? What are we on, a telephone? You're gonna be done with this podcast.
I'm gonna I
will hang up on you right now. And you're going to go and give someone a good word. You're going to go give someone a word that brings healing. You're going to give someone a fruitful, positive word of encouragement.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. If you're not busy for the next 3 hours after this podcast is over, I'll bet you could fill that 3 hours up with all the people in your life who would benefit from a good word from you, your wife, your children, your grandchildren, your colleagues, your parents, your siblings, anybody at your church, your pastor. Why don't you just text your pastor right now and say, thank you for being a faithful pastor, and then leave off the part about the carpet color or the worship songs from last weekend. Okay. Seriously. Just, in fact, you know what? You want to blow your pastor's mind? Simply give him a compliment. And let it be the end, and don't need anything else from him. He will be walking around you for weeks going, what's he up to? He's never actually paid me a compliment before and then not wanted something. So come on, let's do this, man. If we knew how our words landed, man, I'm convinced we would dial back the negative and we would dial up the positive.
Yeah. Let's end on Proverbs 12:14. It says, from the fruit of their lips, people are filled with good things. Dude, from the fruit of their lips, people are filled with good things, and the work of their hands bring them reward. So I think, what you're talking about, dads, let's put our minds to it. Let's put some thought into it. Let's make a little bit of an effort. It doesn't take a whole lot to have the fruit of our lips filling people with good things. Start with your kids, start with your wives, and then, see what fruit begins to be bared in their lives. And I bet you will find that your behavior is reflected in the behavior of your children and in the temperament of your family. Let's be those dads that are looking for ways to use our words that will fill people with good things.
Dad, I hope today's show has been an encouragement to you. Look through Proverbs chapter 12 for every reference to your mouth, and you're going to be both encouraged, convicted, challenged, excited, and inspired to make the most of the words that come out of your mouth. And then join us next week for the wrap up of Proverbs 12 series on our podcast, a show about which I'm extremely proud to bring you because it's on the topic of humility. Okay. For those of you keeping score at home, you will notice an inherent contradiction in that. We will see you next week while we talk about Proverbs 12 and what it has to say about humility. Lawson, thank you. Hunter, thanks
take it easy.
Doing a great job in the background. Dad, see you in a week. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.